You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
Welcome to TFM's Local Watering Hole, coming at you from the city of Gotham tonight. It's fantastic. Apparently it's Christmas in May, but I'm really excited to be here. And Christy, how do you celebrate Christmas in May?
I celebrate it alone in my apartment with a lot of cats.
Oh. See, for me, it's explodable wind-up penguins. So, it's very strange. But I'm really interested. John, how do you celebrate Christmas in May?
Oh, with my circus friends, actually, committing various crimes with Gatling guns and exploding presents at public gatherings.
And umbrellas that do things.
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like there's not enough of that at at malls in May, is exploding presents, so anyway, well, we're going to be talking about Batman Returns as we are moving through our Batman films that we have not covered yet here on the 602 Club. And before we get there, just want to say a huge thank you to everybody who listens. We really, truly do appreciate you joining us here every week on the 602 Club. And of course, you can find the show wherever you get your podcasts, so make sure you're subscribed. If you happen to be on Apple Podcasts, do us a favor. Hit us up with a star rating review. Help the show continue to grow. We'll read your review on the show if you do. Right now, as we're recording, you know what? I just got Sherck on 4K, and I have a 4K digital code for you. So all you need to do, you need to go to us on Twitter at the 602 Club. You need to find the specific tweet about our contest. You only have to do two things. You have to follow us and like that tweet. That's it. And you could win Sherck on 4K. So we'd love to give that to you. So make sure you're doing that. You can also find us over on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. We've got the listeners only discussion group called the Babel Conference there on Facebook. You can join. And of course, we've got Trek.fm you can find online, where you can also go to the contact section, send us an email if you'd like, and see all the other shows we're doing. Huge thank you, though, to our associate producers here, Ken Tripp, Davis Grayson, Ryan Maillet, and Daniel Noah. Appreciate them supporting the show through Patreon. Now, if you like what we do here on the network, we ask you to go to patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you can be part of the team. Make sure everything keeps coming to you here on the network. Every little bit helps, and we have some great contribution levels as well that you can give at. Again, that's patreon.com/TrekFM. Now, this was not on the outline, but I figured you guys would know I'm going to ask this. And John, you're the oldest of all of us here, just by a little bit. But that little bit actually makes a difference for the movies that you ended up seeing in the theater that I didn't. Those couple of years. Much. So I'm wondering for you, as you know, Batman was such a pivotal movie for you. You talked about that when we talked about 89. And so I'm wondering how you were feeling when Batman Returns was coming out, because, I mean, you legitimately loved 89 when it came out.
Oh, and I wasn't alone. A lot of people loved it.
It's very true. I mean, it was
Batman.
A massive movie in 89. It was one of the biggest movies of the year.
It was one of the biggest. It was like a top 10 box office hit until, the 90s. They have all that stuff rotating all the time. But the hype around Batman and then a potential sequel was quick. There were rumors immediately flying, and this is pre-internet days. Rumors immediately in magazines and everything. It was like,
Carrier
are they scouting
pigeon.
A place? Yes, but like the fanzines back then, it was all, I heard that somewhere in North Carolina they're filming, and it's like, no, they're not. What are you talking about? But everybody was really immediately ramped up for it, and my perception that the way I recall it is that basically the hype level going into Batman Returns was essentially, for those who might be a little bit younger, akin to the hype level going into the Phantom Menace. This was, just a few years later, everybody was still super stoked about the first Batman movie, and the fact that they had the Penguin, but it was going to be cool Penguin. It wasn't going to be Burgess Meredith Penguin. Mm-hmm. And we saw what they did with the Joker in '89. And then you saw Catwoman and Michelle Pfeiffer. She was sort of at the height of her fame at this point. And then, you see her in the outfit, and yes, people were kind of like, oh, this is intriguing. And you just saw it and you were like, okay, I know it's going to be weird. I know I love the first one, and this looks immediately interesting. And then the movie was released, and it was, that was a fun ride in and of itself. We can get to that later, but, with first reactions and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Christy, do you remember or recall the first time you ended up seeing Batman Returns?
Yeah, I definitely didn't see it till it was on home release, but not long after it came out in the 90s. And this was my favorite Catwoman for a long time. Because, this was the first time I had ever really seen a lot of Catwoman on screen. I knew of her before that, but this was the one that I watched over and over again, and something that my dad and I watched together, and inspired me wanting to dress up like Catwoman and everything. It fascinated me. And then also the back handsprings.
Yes. There are a lot of back handsprings. In fact, apparently that's the only way Catwoman knows how to walk is through a back handspring.
Yep.
So it's interesting because if one thought my response to '89 was tepid back in the day when I first saw it, the response to this was even worse. And it is very interesting, John, you mentioned how this movie it had a not quite the response that '89 did. And I think that that's something that is fascinating. And it's one of those things, it's interesting having lived through that time, because for me personally, and I think, for you and many others, we had gotten used to sequels being relatively good for major franchises. Star Trek II was an incredible, even better than the first one. Empire Strikes Back, arguably better than the first one, and so, Indiana Jones, The Temple of Doom, not as good as the first one, but still good, I don't know. It feels like we got a little bit spoiled in the 80s with a lot of sequels being good. Heck, we talked about Rambo 2 here. Rambo 2 was good. Rocky 2 was good. We could go on and on with the amount of films. Many people thought Superman 2 was better than Superman. The list goes on, and so it's very interesting to get to this. And so I wanted to ask you, John and Christy, this movie is the origin for our two big characters, much the way that the first movie gave us the origin of Batman in some ways, but really the origin of Joker. This movie continues that trend in the sense that we're going to really focus on our villains and give their origin stories. And we even open the film with how Penguin comes to be, his origin story. And so I just wanted to ask you with first how you feel like that works. One, as kind of the opening of the movie, and two, how it just works as a function of the film, Penguin's origin story. Does it work for you guys?
Okay. I'm going to preface this by saying that my relationship with this movie is very complicated, because the time that it came out, I was...
So if you put on the Facebook status is it's complicated?
Yeah. Okay. It's one of those things where when it first came out, I really, really loved it. I was not in the best place, emotionally or mentally. And there are things in this that really speak to that sort of thing. In a sense, there are aspects of this movie that to this day feel a little bit like a hand on the shoulder sort of thing, where it's it's okay to be an outcast. It's okay to be a little bit odd. Mm-hmm. You can still find even the Penguin, he still finds a family. Granted, it's a crime family, but he still finds people that are,
accepting,
yeah, he is who he is, and that's fine. So there is that aspect of it. There are some, really solid set pieces and everything, but to get to the opening is, I think, important because it's an immediate declaration of what sensibility is informing this movie, right? It's letting you know, and I think you have to admire the opening in the sense that it puts all of its cards on the table and says, this is the type of reality we're in here, which I think is a very important reset button because the first Batman went to great lengths to root it in, quote unquote, our reality.
Yes.
Whereas this movie is immediately saying, this isn't quite your reality. Mm-hmm. We're going back a little more, Silver Age comics sort of thing, where an abandoned baby could be raised by penguins, right?
Right.
It's a crazy origin story, but when you were 7 years old reading a comic book, especially if you were a 7-year-old reading the comics in the 1960s, it's kind of like, oh, wow, that's a crazy monster story now. And so is it off-putting? Yes, very much so. Is it an immediate declaration? Yes, very much so. Was it at the time an incredible... I kind of love it in the sense that that opening is Tim Burton standing by his friend Paul Rubens, who had been through a lot by that point, and letting Paul Rubens know, hey, buddy, I got your back. I'll at least give you a role every so often. Because Paul Rubens, I don't know if anybody knows, but had gone through a bit of a scandal with involving adult theater and himself. Mm-hmm. And so this was sort of Paul Rubens being on screen, and I think it's one friend helping out another and saying like, hey, I'll at least get you a screen credit, keep you acting so that people start thinking about something else than that. So, but yeah, that's my stance on the beginning of it.
That's a good way of putting it, because I do think that I've always liked a cold open where they bring you directly into what's happening without giving a ton of dialogue or exposition and writing before diving into the story. So I liked that they're just showing you what happened with Penguin and giving you an origin for him because, maybe people that generally are going to see that movie in the theater originally had no idea about Penguin, or at least had possibly seen him in the old 60s Batman stuff, but didn't know much about him otherwise. So I think that you needed it for that reason. And I like the way that they show you. But I also think that, I don't know, the thing for me too is that it's called Batman Returns, not Penguin's Origins. Mm-hmm. So that's the thing that kind of throws me off with it.
Sure. It's funny, John, you mentioned how this is clearly Burton making a statement saying this is what this movie is going to be, and how you rightly, I think, showed that this movie is diametrically opposed to the first movie in the sense of its tone. Like, the first movie goes to such great lengths to kind of root it in a slightly fantastical world, but making Batman himself and a lot of things going around more grounded, and this movie kind of throws all of that out the window, almost literally, and says, no, basically, this is going to feel like a movie that he'll make later on, which is The Nightmare Before Christmas, and the absurdity of that. That's what this movie really turns out to be. And I think, like you, Christy, I'm immediately thrown off by getting into this because it's like, this is not the same place that I was before. It doesn't feel like the same world. It doesn't really feel like a good continuation of what we had before. And I think that the opening, I hadn't seen this movie in probably 20 years. And so I really didn't have a ton of recollection of what it was like. And that I think I texted John and another friend of ours, and I was just like, what is happening? Like, this is and so personally, I think Penguin's origin specifically, I think one of the things that I kind of pinpointed between that and what we get with Catwoman's origin is that he just takes things so literally. Like, And it feels like way too literal of a thing that we're literally going to have a guy get thrown down a river and ends up being raised by penguins, and that's why he's called Penguin. And it harkens back to, it's like the original movie had done such a good job of differentiating itself from the 66 Batman, and every once in a while giving a sly wink to it. This movie completely embraces almost that. I think that mentality of like, we're going to take everything so over the top that there's no believability in it anymore.
See, I think that, okay, first and foremost, anytime that I'm issuing sort of like a counterpoint, I'm going to preface our where we're going to end up at the end of this show. I'm not particularly defending the movie. Like I said, I have a very complicated sort of, reaction to it every time. If anything, it's a movie that over time I sort of obsessively rewatch because I keep wanting it to be better than it is. Because I'm
I'm so sorry.
Because but the thing is, rolling the clock back, like I said, the first time I ever saw it, it spoke to me. It hit me in a certain way because of the period I was in my life. Now, intellectually, I can say I'm not there anymore, and therefore I can recognize, X, Y, and Z about it. But I think that the fact that the penguins come up is then sort of explained away / supported by Bruce Wayne while he's doing his detective work, saying about the penguin boy who was raised as part of the circus. So it's not that the penguins raised him, it's that the circus raised him, but it's not distinctly drawn enough attention to, like some sort of line of dialogue. Like even if, for instance, if the bearded circus guy had some sort of passing line with Penguin about how, I'm the one that raised you or something like that. Like just one little insertion of dialogue alleviates the perception problem there. But I think that more than anything, all of the problems stem from the fact that you have two good movies that are mashed together. Because what this movie really falls victim to is the old idea that, well, we did that, we got to find some way to ramp it up. We got to crank up the action and the intensity in this, so cram as much into it as you can. And I think that is why the Penguin's whole arc, if you take this movie and you cut it out and you only watch the Penguin parts, and then you only watch the Catwoman parts, you say to yourself, wow, these are actually really good threads with some really interesting things to say. Here's Penguin discarded by his parents, and Bruce Wayne lost his parents, but they at least loved him. And then you also see that like his parents were really sort of the inhuman ones because they threw away their child in a river, for Pete's sake. Mm-hmm. Like that's awful. And then Catwoman, there are so many statements with her storyline that are obviously meant to be statements about sexism and behavior in the workplace and all of those sorts of things. And then you have this tenuous third villain of Max Sherck who ties them together sort of, but really just winds up sort of like leeching the attention away from the two villains. And it's like, that's why I think the Penguin stuff irritates, is because they cram so much other stuff into it that you don't get that alleviating dialogue later, because they got to keep everything moving. They got to keep everybody talking about their specific plot and motive and that sort of thing.
And that's kind of what I was going to agree with you on as well, John, is I do think you're right, Matt, that they do go too literal sometimes in the characterization. But that the general tone of the movie is good and has some deep things that it's exploring. But I think it does just lean too much sometimes with the characters individually into that, what we see later as Tim Burton's thing of like how he goes over the top dark with everything.
Yeah.
'Cause like, Catwoman eating the live bird, or Penguin constantly having black sludge coming out of his mouth and talking about killing everybody's firstborn child and stuff, it's like just leaning way into the dark side for shock value.
Well, and John, you brought up something that I think is really interesting because, you have Max Sherck, who, Christopher Walken's always great. And yet, I think you're absolutely right. He takes all motivation away from the actual villains, and he kind of keeps pushing them into places. And so, you get him trying to get Penguin to run for mayor because he thinks he's going to be able to control Penguin and get what he wants with his, not so power plants, because it's going to suck away power. It's like, and the whole theme of that they're trying to go with it, it's really not, villains that are the villains. It's really the politicians that are villains. And it's like, it's just so messy with him as a character. Like nothing's really clear. Everything feels as murky as the mud falling out of, Oswald Cobblepot's mouth. Why he's constantly drooling black, I don't really know. So it just, you're absolutely right. They threw too much into this, and really what you end up turning this into is what another movie years later is going to run into, which is Spider-Man 3, where you just have way too many villains, way too much going on, and it never congeals into the story you want. And anything you're trying to say gets lost because it's less than half-baked. It feels like as cold as the fish that, Penguin is chowing down on.
Well, but see, the thing is, it's important what you're pointing out there about the template is even though there are problems with this was a massively successful movie. So the lesson that Hollywood received was, well, we need to keep going down this track. And I have a friend, I've mentioned him many times on many different appearances on different places and everything like that, Joey, whom I've known since I was 15 years old. And Joey, after Batman Returns, every time he saw a trailer for something where there were two villains in the superhero movie, he would get visibly angry because he would say, it's going to be just like Batman Returns. Nobody's going to get enough screen time. The hero's going to get the short shrift. And it was like, hey, come on, man, calm down. It might not be so bad this time, but like 9 times out of 10, Joey was spot on. He'd see two villains on the poster and he'd say, damn it, I wish they would just go back to one villain. And it's like, he's got a point here. He's got a point. And that's the problem, right? Is you can never tell what the studio execs are going to use as their metric for what template to copy. And if you went with fan reaction, they would say, okay, we kind of screwed up with Batman Returns. Let's go back. They liked the tone of the first one, but we need to simplify it and keep it focused. And instead, and we'll get to this later in the series, they made other corrections that were kind of like, guys, I don't think you really paid attention to what people had a problem with here. But okay. Yeah. But the thing is, like, for all of its problems, there are certain things that still rise above. They're still very watchable about this movie. And there is some alternate universe where Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman is the sole, antagonist character in Batman Returns. And it is one of the greatest superhero films of all time as a result. Like there was such potential, and Michelle Pfeiffer brings so much to the role. I mean, Danny DeVito does too. And it's just, it just gets under my skin every time I watch it because I get caught up in Catwoman and then like it switches and I'm like, I don't care as much about this. I want more Catwoman. And not just because she looks purty and stuff like that. She's a legitimately interesting character. With like this whole traumatic thing and this real theme behind her. And it's just so frustrating that we didn't get that.
Yeah. Well, and that's something that I just wanted to add to that I really loved about how they wrote her in this, as well as how Michelle Pfeiffer portrayed her, which was they do show you the tortured nature of Catwoman and Batman's relationship. that this is when you really get to see that they have this. Sometimes we love each other, and then other times we think, okay, I guess we have to go fight now. You know, they constantly feel like they have a lot of things in common, but they're supposed to hate each other. And so I love that you're getting to see that. And then also just the way that Michelle really plays it up. Especially the cat-like tendencies of, you know, I'm going to take a bath now, and, you know, licking her arm, or, you know, with the claws and things like that. She just is, aside from even, like you're saying, John, the, you know, good-looking piece of it, she is captivating when she's on the screen. And then the costume was so different, and it was just really cool.
Yeah.
You know, it's so interesting. I'm going to completely disagree with both of you. I can't stand her in this film, and I can't stand the role of Catwoman in this movie. It's so over the top, and it's so overplayed that it doesn't work for me whatsoever. I think that they have a really good idea of this being a very tortured woman who is being completely mistreated in her job. And she's been completely mistreated for most of her life, you can tell. And I think that's really interesting. I think that, unfortunately, the worst tendencies of Tim Burton cause Michelle Pfeiffer to overplay every single scene that she's in. So it comes across as silly instead of really moving in any way, shape, or form. I think the beginning is better, but as the movie goes on, she starts doing things that, like, Christy, you mentioned, like, her, like, pretending to be a cat and, like, bathing herself, and it's just like, that is something that would come straight from Batman 66, and it is so over the top here, it doesn't work for me, and so I end up kind of hating this Catwoman personally. I know nuts. I know you think I'm crazy, but it just doesn't work. And this is the place where, for me, with Penguin and Catwoman's origin, the worst tendencies of Burton are here in that he's pushing things so far to the absurdity that works in something where you're doing a claymation, you know, Nightmare Before Christmas type of thing. It doesn't work here. And I think Burton is somebody who benefits from having people tell him no. And because he had more creative control here, he just went nuts. And in this role, where I liked Vicky Vale a lot because of her really down-to-earth, kind of more grounded portrayal, here I think he pushes Michelle Pfeiffer in a direction that just, it makes it absurd instead of work for me. So, and
that's, you know, of course that's fair. You know, like the whole thing where, like, it might not work for you and everything, and you don't need my permission to think what you think, obviously. Where I very much disagree with you here, and the thing, this is what's difficult, is I do not love Batman Returns. Like, I'm going to keep coming back to that, right? Mm-hmm. Like, this is a movie that I think has significant problems. And you know, we can get to some of the technical stuff later, right? But I don't think that going over the top in and of itself is a problem, right?
In and of itself, no, I would agree.
No, Penguin over the top in his own movie is fine. Catwoman over the top in her own movie is fine. I think that what the problem is that you have everybody going over the top, mm-hmm. but your hero is more reserved. Mm-hmm. And it's...
Yeah, that could be. Yeah.
That's really what's jarring, is like there's an imbalance in everything. And
yeah,
I think
that's a good point.
I think that this Catwoman is super interesting as well, because her origin story previous to this in the comics, you know, of the decade previous, she was always like a prostitute or something like that. And in this, she's the woman who played by the rules and went through everything. And it was actually, if anything, she's this very important symbolic response to the chauvinism in the business world that she had to deal with. Mm-hmm. And that's a really interesting sort of thing to pick apart. And, again, I'm not staunchly defending the film, right? There are problems, but Catwoman's not the problem. Like there are so many things where it's like, I really think that Max Sherck is a character that belongs to her arc, and he's forcibly put into the Penguin arc. Mm-hmm. And that's where Sherck doesn't work. And that's why this connective tissue falls apart. Also, the fact that they have Sherck is why Batman gets virtually no screen time in this, which is doubly frustrating because I think Keaton's performance is actually even better in this than it was in the original Batman. And I think Batman's armor is better than it was. This is one of my favorite Batman suits, right? Like they streamlined it a little bit, looks a little more flexible, mm-hmm. but they also gave him, instead of that, this is their first foray into, instead of crafting the fake abs and everything, and then in the next movie, nipples, it actually looks like armor. And it's kind of this really cool look where it's like, oh, neat. And also the idea that, it is like body armor, and Catwoman is able to find, okay, there's, you have your front and your back armored, but your sides, so that you can move, are,
the weak spot.
They're the weak spot. They're more flexible. Suddenly Batman's suit, just from one movie to the next, becomes eminently more plausible as a means of, going around and fighting crime, with the exception of the wings that pop out at that one point. But that's okay. That's okay. Well, listen, they hadn't invented the baloney mimetic fiber with electricity that Christopher Nolan decided to bring in there.
That made more sense.
But
I know, but none of us were thinking that way.
I do want to acknowledge, though, that although there are a lot of things that I love about this Catwoman, even though I know, Matt, you disagree, I think that the one place that we can all agree, which I think we would, is the way that they explain how she becomes Catwoman in this movie. I just don't like that they have, once she's pushed out the window, the whole scene with all of the cats come to warm her up, I guess, and then one is chewing on her finger, and then the whole scene of her trashing her apartment. It just doesn't really make sense, and it's also gross.
Yeah.
Yes. I agree. There were so many subtler ways they could have her, quote unquote, left for dead instead of falling from a giant spire. And I know that we're supposed to say, oh, well, she fell through the awnings, and we've always accepted that in movies as, oh, well,
it cushions your fall.
The wind was just the right way, and it slowed you down just enough. There were better ways they could have done that and still had that menacing scene with Sherck.
Well, so, and I acknowledge, and I'll definitely give to you, John, that part of this could be completely the imbalance that the movie is, where it doesn't have a tone to which where it ever finds any counterbalance to all the crazy that's happening. Because, case in point, there's more of a balance, even though the first movie has more Joker in it than Batman. There's still more of a balance, because when you're not with Joker, you're either with Vicky Vale or with Keaton, and they're playing it straight. Mm-hmm. And so you end up having a nice balance of kind of realism with crazy. This movie, there's such an imbalance of crazy because Batman probably has, an eighth of this movie. And
maybe
the rest of it's Catwoman and Penguin, and then Sherck, and it's just it never feels like it can find a consistent tone that allows those characters to have their over the top moments, but not feel like it's to the absurdity level. And I think we've hit on this, but I cannot believe that a movie called Batman Returns has so little Batman in it.
Yes,
it's insane how little time that Keaton has in this film. and he got paid like $10 million to do like 12 days of work, it seems like. So good for him. But it's ridiculous. I mean, this movie should not be called Batman Returns. It should be called like Penguin and Catwoman meet Batman or something, because there's no Batman in this movie.
It's true. There is very little, although he does get some magnificent visual tableau, right? Like when he's sitting alone in his study and the bat signal goes off, and then you see the spotlights turn and twist, and that shot of him turning and looking with the bat symbol behind him.
Yeah.
That is a beautiful image. I love it to this day. It is a beautiful image, and I love it. I always shelve the idea of, well, what if the bat signal goes off and he has like a visitor in the house? Does he have a little switch where he turns it off so he doesn't know? Because that would be a dead giveaway. No, I'm just a Batman fan. I just like to know when he's going around somewhere. But there is too little Batman here. He suffers from that because they don't bring back anybody, right? If they brought back Vicky, it would be tied in, right? If they brought back people, that's one thing, but the fact that they have to go to the effort to introduce 3 major characters, that's naturally going to take away from your hero. But I will say that, again, there are some beautiful moments that he has. There are some whimsical moments. I do think Keaton plays it really well. I think that one of the things that also hurts the movie, and this is a big thing that I really harp on, is the changing of the director of photography and the loss of Anton Furst as production designer really hurt this movie a whole lot, because everything looks more fake too. So you have this imbalance between the characters. You have indulging a little bit too much that whimsy that Burton enjoys. And then you have sets that look fake. Mm-hmm. Whereas they went to great lengths again in 89 to make it look and function like a real city. It felt like a real place on Earth. Whereas this looks like a movie set in so many shots that you can't really buy into this Gotham existing.
It feels more like a stage play more than even a movie set.
Well, and especially when they, every time they visit the zoo, which I'm still like, does anything there look like a zoo? It doesn't to me.
Yeah. I know.
But every time that felt fake to me. It felt way too much like I was looking at a stage play or a set on a soundstage. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, John, because I think, to me, the production and the direction of this film really do suffer. And I think one of the biggest ways in that is that the absurdity level of the film is even seen in its production design and the look and the feel of it. Like, we had, like you said, more of a realism in that first movie. And the way it's shot, the lighting, and everything else, it's all stripped away here. So all we see is artifice, and again, I would just say really, in many ways, absurdity. And it goes all the way to the beginning of the movie, where the Penguin is born, and that feels like a really bad set from some Nutcracker sweet production in podunk United States. Like, it doesn't feel like a real, like, and Batman's house is not even the same house anymore. It's like, why did all of a sudden Wayne Manor turn into this weird, very like stoic, straight up and down house that looks like it's like Batman really downsized? Like, did things not go well in the 80s there for him, or
just wait till you get to Batman Forever.
Which I haven't seen in years too, so I don't remember what the Wayne Manor looks like there.
Yeah. Anyway, I want to ask you this question, though, Matt, and you too, Christy. Do you think that had this been an animated Batman feature, would you have bought into it and forgiven some of these tendencies because you wouldn't have been asked visually to believe in it as a real environment? Christy, I'll kick that to you first. Do you think this works as an animated feature, or do you think that this is just too much of a mess to really work regardless of the sort of the visual milieu you're in?
I think in general it would have been more viable if it was animated, because you can do more unbelievable things, I think, in animation sometimes than you can make look real enough on screen. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, but I do still think that it suffers from too many villains, even if it was animated. You know, cut Sherck and then it would be better.
It is a good question.
Yeah.
And I think it's a valid question because a lot of things can work better in animation. My initial thought, though, is that that's insulting to Batman the Animated Series, you know, which did so many great storylines with its characters and everything, and never came off this absurd.
Well, that's what's really interesting, and sort of like what spurs the question is, a year later we got Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which I can tell you, as a Batman fan, I saw that a year later with my aforementioned friend Joey, and we were basically, our reaction was that we like this better than Batman Returns. Can we sort of like find a way to swap these out? Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, of course, Mask of the Phantasm is just another, you know, it's another origin story for everybody. And so it doesn't really mesh with 89. But, you know, as a kickoff to its own series, it's amazing. But that's what's so interesting is how to reconcile. And this, I think, also is, and I know I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but because of the animated series, I think that the animated series went a long way to ameliorating some of the disappointment with this, because it came out so quickly afterward that we were able to sort of compartmentalize Batman Returns and focus on what we liked about it. And the fact that it was more, you know, animation friendly in certain respects allowed us, you know, to sort of like mingle our memories together. So in a sense, the animated series worked really quickly to rehab the initial reactions to this, which, I mean, were like really negative. Like, parents were angry about this movie because Penguin was so dark. And they were like, that's the big reason for the course correction after Returns, is there were practically like letter writing campaigns. They were so mad at Warner Brothers for letting Burton do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I believe that.
I mean, and I will say, you know, I think that's a great question. And I think one of the things we kind of see is that with the production, I also do think much of the blame for this film lies at the feet of Burton being given too much control and allowed to run amok with what he does. And I say that because he literally was given complete control, basically, of this film because he wanted more. And then this is what he does with it. Whereas you do see the juxtaposition of people who really love the character of Batman in the animated series and then do something that feels akin to what Burton was going for in 89, extrapolate that to animation. They even use, like, the other thing about the production of this film is that Gotham becomes this really weird, amorphous place that doesn't really even make any sense. It's like you said, it's out of time, you know, whereas the Gotham that we got in 89 was very rooted in the real world, except it was just, you know, Gotham itself was exaggerated. But the world they lived in with the technology and everything all felt pretty realistic. Whereas this movie, it's this weird combination of, like, it's a cross between Dickensian England in some ways, and yet they have some technology. There's just this weird imbalance that they want to have that it just never seems to really connect, even with the movie that came before, but even with itself.
But the thing is, there's a production element that's introduced into this version of Gotham that is really leaned into in the upcoming films of the suddenly ever-present giant statuary everywhere. And so yeah, Batman Returns, that actually kicks it off, and it's
well, I mean, because they're leaning into like that fascist architecture, World's Fair type of architecture for Gotham City, and they just, again, it's absurd how far they take it.
You mean the statues that you see, like on literally either side everywhere. Of the building? Yeah.
Yeah, there's there's some bad tendencies. I think there's also a bad tendency with the score, because this is Elfman starting to eat himself in terms of his scores, because 89 Batman, that score is absolutely incredible. It's phenomenal. It's one of the best of the last 50 years. It is stone cold classic, can't touch it, amazing. He also does Edward Scissorhands and Scrooged and Pee-wee's Big Adventure and Darkman, which is its own spoof of Batman. And what's weird is Batman Returns score exists in this sort of blender state with all of those other ones. And there are parts of it that work really, really well, and there are parts of it that really, really don't. And so I would just be curious. I mean, Christy, what, like, full disclosure, I had the CD of the score and I listened to it constantly because of the parts that I did love and I still love. Like the music from Penguin's Death is fantastic. It's heart-wrenching to listen to. Like Elfman got what he was going for. But there are other things that are just sort of the introduction of the children's voices that sounds a lot like the Scrooged score is really sort of off-putting, and that sort of thing. So I just curious what you guys thought of the music.
The only thing that really stands out to me in this one is having Batman's theme back a lot, that we hear in 89, which I really like. And then, like you said, John, the music for Penguin's Death. And then I do really like the scene and the music from Bruce and Selina sitting in front of the fire.
Oh, yeah. That is a good cue.
But otherwise, yeah, it feels like they don't make sense with what fits in between each of those moments.
I won't lie. Even though it makes sense because he's fighting this circus gang, the circus music while he's fighting the circus gang robs it of any hope of seriousness, which is odd because he torches one person, he blows one guy up. So anybody that's really cranked up about the kill count of Batman in Snyder's movies really needs to watch Batman Returns, because he even smiles. He thinks it's a chuckle.
Yeah, when he blows that guy up, it's great.
Who I will point out, just in case anybody is curious, the guy that he blows up with the dynamite is actually the main antagonist at the end of Over the Top, starring Sylvester Stallone. So, there you go. It's tying together the Stallone connected universe there.
So, I like you bring up the score because obviously, like you said, 89 is great. Regardless of even if you don't even have to like that movie to like that score. It's just so good. Here, it feels like he was doing Home Alone before John Williams will do Home Alone, and it works better in Home Alone because that movie is a goofy, silly movie when it comes to portraying the villains as ridiculous and here, like you said, when you're playing like circus music and Batman's fighting in the street, it just makes it feel so silly. The music needed to have a weight to it because what was happening on screen was ridiculous. Batman's fighting these weird, crazy circus clowns. And, one, I hate clowns anyway because they're creepy and scary. And two, the music didn't help make this scene feel legitimate. And it just, it's one of those places where the movie doesn't really help itself by making the right choices. And I think one of the things that I really come to is that it seems like in almost every single area, nobody's really making the right choices to bring this movie together as a cohesive whole.
You know, it's interesting you say that too, because the thing is, as I think through it, the music, I think that where it falls apart are the moments where it's obvious Elfman is writing to what's on screen as opposed to writing what feels right. Because to go back to that 89 score, the reason it works so well is it's like Williams's 1978 Superman score. It's an opera on its own. You can write the movie in your head as you go, and it has its own flow, whereas a lot of the cues in this don't work separate from the movie. And I think that also ties in, because while you're talking, I'm thinking about, you know, you said nobody's making the right choices. I realize as I'm replaying that first fight Batman shows up to, you know, fight the circus gang, if some of the photography had just been a little tighter so that the upper portion of the city wasn't as visible above their heads, I think it would have looked better. And I'm curious, because now I want to go back and rewatch do a little like side by side. I think that likely the first one looks as good as it does because Pratt knew how to frame it so that we weren't seeing the artifice. Whereas this feels less concerned with masking the artifice. And I think they could have gotten away with some tighter photography, and, you know, better music at those scenes to make it more real.
Well, and I think one of the things is that I noticed with the production, and we already kind of talked about this, but it's just something to add, which is, and it kind of goes along with everything we're talking about with the score and everything, is like, this movie is so, makes Gotham feel even more claustrophobic than before, to the point of it, again, it doesn't feel real anymore. Like, we're so closed in that we've taken it to a level to which it doesn't actually even make sense. And, you know, we talk about that in film, when it comes to like special effects and everything, and what can trick the brain into making it feel more real and what doesn't. And this is one of those places where it does feel like that, you know, first not being there as a production designer, and then the DP not being there either, you lost two people who understood how to trick the brain into making things feel more real. And you're absolutely right here, John, is that in the end, too, the score isn't helping you do that either. It's not helping trick your brain, where so many times where scores can do that, where they take a scene and like they add this whole other layer that if you take it away, it feels crazy. But when you put the score on there, it like feels perfect. It feels like, oh, well, it just makes everything better. And that doesn't happen in this film.
But again, it's important to turn it around and lay it at Burton's feet, because I think that, you know, something you said earlier very much is true. He has a massive success with Batman. And so Warner Brothers backs off and says, he delivered us a massive hit the first time. We put guardrails on him. Let's see if he can really take it to the next level if we back off a little bit. He's proven he can do it. He's proven he can deliver. So let's give him a little bit more. And I think that might be, you know, to the point of Burton is a director where if somebody can push back against him, it produces a better product. Burton should be allowed to think in these terms, but if you want to produce the best film, you have to have somebody there who can help shape it into a more palatable thing. Because at the end of the day, right, there's the whole school. Are you making the film for yourself, or are you making the film for an audience? Right? An artist will say, I make it for myself. If the audience loves it, that's fine. And I think this very much falls into Burton made this for himself. And the reason for the sort of massive sense of disappointment is that the first one was made for others and this was made for him, and that's why they don't quite mesh.
Mm-hmm.
That's so fascinating, and I feel like we could have a really interesting discussion with like a Snyder Cuts episode about that, because I could want to have a whole conversation about like letting a filmmaker kind of do their own thing, but at the same time, look, no director makes anything in a vacuum.
Right.
And so even George Lucas, when he has full control over Star Wars and the prequels, he's not making things in a vacuum.
Right.
And so, it is all about the people that you work with. And so I think it's really, it's just so interesting. So I am fascinated then, because I feel like this has been such a discussion where some of the stuff we agree on, some of the stuff we don't agree on, but I feel like there is a place that we do agree, and that might be kind of where we land ratings-wise with Batman Returns. And so, Christy, I'm fascinated to see where you're going to go with this.
So I do think that you've both brought up some valid things that I had even forgotten until this rewatch that do go against it being good. It really, although there are things that I really love about Catwoman in this movie, I think that definitely that scene of her intro doesn't make any sense and is a little too over the top. And I think that there was a definite lack of Batman in a movie called Batman Returns that we all noticed. And then that coupled with, like John was saying, the over the top nature of the other characters, and a muted Batman didn't really work. So, I do have to be more honest with myself about, is it just nostalgia that would make me rate it higher? So I really come down to a 3.5 out of 5 bullwhips, because there's a lot of things that I do still love about it. And maybe that is also the nostalgia piece, but I am being honest about the things that I don't like about it. And, that if they just tweaked a few things, like you said, John, maybe eventually it'll get better, right?
Yeah. You keep hoping for sure. And I like that you said bullwhips, because one of my favorite moments in the movie, which I think is legitimately funny, is when the security guards encounter her inside the department store, and they say, well, it was I don't know whether to shoot or to fall in love. It's such a cute exchange, especially because she said, always confusing your pistols with your privates. That's such a cutting and interesting scene to sort of like pull apart, because it's funny. And then you realize how, in that sense, there are certain exchanges like that are a little bit ahead of their time in terms of what the movie is looking at. I wind up, and it might be because I'm a softie for it, and it's tough for me, but there are things that I legitimately enjoy in this film for all of its flaws. And maybe, just maybe, it's got my favorite Susie and the Banshees song in it. So that's always good. If anybody's wondering, the song Face to Face that's playing while they're dancing at the Sherck costume or masquerade ball, it's a fantastic song. It's a really great song. And I was a Susie Sue or Susie and the Banshees fan for a time. And it's a really good song. I wind up giving it 2.5. I'm not as harsh on it as you are, Matt. I'm not as in love with it as you are, Christy. I recognize that what works really works well. And I have to be kind to any movie that has a character kill someone, and in exchange afterward is, you just told me you were going to scare her. And the Penguin's reply is, she looked pretty scared to me. That's another fantastic, like, there are just so many little moments like that are just legitimately funny and endearing. So yeah, 2.5 for me.
Well, and to your point too, I give it a negative for the plays on words that were really bad.
Yeah, that's true.
Like what the Penguin says about cats. Oh,
yeah. Although when when he walks upstairs and that one guy with the beard in the circus gang says, "Penguin, there's somebody here to see you." That was a pretty cute.
That's funny.
Emphasis.
But when they're trying too hard, it's like, oh, just stop. Like it. Although I get what Catwoman was trying to do with "I am woman," she says, "I'm Catwoman, hear me roar."
Yeah. True.
Well, you made my job easy, both of you. I hadn't seen this movie in years for a reason, because I did not really enjoy it my first time watching it. And then I watched it again and I realized that I really didn't enjoy this movie. I legitimately am hard pressed to find a comic book movie I dislike more than this. Nothing works for me, really. And it'll be interesting because, again, I haven't seen most of these versions of Batman in a very long time. So it was fascinating to me because we started off on a decent trend in the sense that, like, I was going up, like Batman 89 went up a little bit for me. And, like, I appreciated it a little bit more. I thought, oh, maybe that'll happen with Batman Returns. And then the Penguin origin is the way we open the movie. And I was like, oh no, I got a bad feeling about this. And it never left, unfortunately. And so look, I'm glad that you guys have more enjoyment for the film than I do. It's not one of those where I would fight anybody about it. I didn't enjoy it. And I'll give the movie 1.5 stars because I really like that Batman fries somebody with the Batmobile as a barbecue. I think that's great. That was the best moment in the movie for me. And so really glad to see that happen. And I thought it was funny that Batman just kind of enjoys killing people in this movie. Like you said, when he blows that guy up and like got a little smirk on his face, like, that was funny. Let's see what I can do next. So
you mean your favorite moment wasn't the Penguin flying upward on his umbrella?
Oh, for Pete's sake.
That's about as bad as lightsabers that make people fly, but that's a whole other conversation.
I swear to God, if you talk ill of helicopter lightsabers, I will come through this screen and I will slap you senseless. Don't you dare. Here I was about to concede that it looked as bad as the elevator shaft in Star Trek V. When they're they're flying on that rig, and you can actually see the shadow of the rig behind it. It's like, really, guys, come on! You couldn't figure out a better way to shoot this? Come on, yeah.
Anyway, well, what I'm excited though is that it is time for recommendations. So, John, I'm really interested to see what you would like to recommend to everybody this week.
Another film that I rewatched recently, so that my wife could see it for the first time. Can't believe it took her this long to see it, but and I enjoyed it even more than the first time I watched it, is Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Oh, such a great film.
I think is just magnificent from first to last frame. I think it's compelling. I think it's funny. I think it is slick. I think the world of this. I am actually terrified to see what happens with his next film. Because the last time I was this bonkers in love with a Quentin Tarantino movie, it was Jackie Brown. And then he released Kill Bill Volume 1. And I felt so hurt that he did that to me. Now, full disclosure, Kill Bill, The Whole Bloody Affair is perfectly fine and a great film. But when it's split into two pieces, I don't care for Kill Bill that way. But Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I don't see how Tarantino can top himself, or his crew can top themselves or anything like that. So I heartily recommend Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, especially if you know anything about the tragedy of what went down. It's such a cathartic, cleansing experience to see history the way you wish it could have been, instead of history the way that it went.
Hence why Inglourious Bastards is a great movie.
That too.
That's
true. Right. You're absolutely correct. Absolutely.
Well, I do have something that I would like to recommend. And it's funny because it's definitely not in the realm of serious at all. But my husband and I came across a movie on HBO Max that we had remarkably somehow not seen, called Get Hard, with Kevin Hart and Will Ferrell. And it follows the story of Will Ferrell's character being convicted of fraud in the stock market and sentenced to a stay in San Quentin in prison. And Kevin Hart is the guy that washed his car every day. And just because he's black, Will Ferrell thinks that he has been in prison before and asks him to prepare him for it. So it's like a training montage gone wrong of how you prepare to survive prison.
That sounds pretty funny.
It's ridiculous and funny.
That,
right.
Yeah, that is pretty good. So we, my wife and I went to the movies this weekend with some friends. It was wonderful, and we went and saw a brand new film that just got released called Dream Horse, which is a true story about a town in Wales that creates a syndicate, which they birth a racing horse, have that racing horse raised, and it's about what happens to this town in the pursuit of their dream to see the horse that they have all been banding together and, putting, as they call it, a tenner in a week to make sure that this horse can be trained and all this. It's just a phenomenal film. I felt it was heartwarming and wonderful and beautiful, and it just such a great story. It's got Toni Collette in it as well as Damian Lewis, and was just a fantastic feel-good film. One of the best movies I've seen in the theater this year, and so I just highly encourage you to find it and go see it. It was just, it's the kind of movie we just need right now, to be reminded there are good things out there. And so I just loved it. I really loved it. I hope everybody will go see Dream Horse. And, as theaters are opening, support those local theaters we got there. Bring them back strong. So, well, this has been so much fun. And I honestly am so excited that the next time that we get together to talk about a Batman film, it'll be Batman Forever, which I have some really interesting stories about my first time seeing that movie. So before we get there, though, John, anybody wants to check out what else you've got going on, which of course they do, where can they find you?
Oh, that's not true. Nobody does. It's I'm Kessel Junkie, KESSELJUNKIE on your social network of choice. I recommend Letterboxd. I have a lot of fun writing reviews, trying to make them entertaining and funny. And you can find me actually over on the Nerd Party Network, where I co-host House Lights, which is a series where we examine the works of directors from first to last. And you can find me also over there on the Nerd Party co-hosting Aggressive Negotiations, a Star Wars podcast that I co-host with you, Matt. And, that's pretty much where you can find me. Christy, how about you?
Well, I was going to add that you definitely do want to follow Kessel Junkie because it is entertaining. So
thank you.
You're welcome. But you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at BestBenBell, and of course sometimes in the Babel Conference too on Facebook. And when I'm not on 602 Club, I do a show with my friends Amanda and Teresa called Sabers and Spells, which is on the Skywalking Through Neverland network. And we talk about geeky stuff that we don't usually get to talk about. So like I was saying, our next episode coming out is going to be about how we got into our Marvel fandom. And then I think, speaking of Batman, we should do one how we got into DC fandom. Why not?
Ooh, that'd be good.
Yeah, so that's what we do. So find us at Sabers and Spells on all your social media pages as well.
Well, and you could find me on all the social media platforms that I'm on under Matt Rushing 02. So if you are on a social media platform, just search for that name and you'll find me if I'm there. You can also find me here on the network, not only doing Skyner Cuts with John here in this feed, as we mentioned, but also doing Literary Treks and The Orb. Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek, and The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And over on the Nerd Party Network, of course, with Aggressive Negotiations, you can find the archive show now, Owlposts with Drea Kaufman, where we talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. So hopefully you'll check that out. But thank you so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?